first slide to come up. I'm from Sheffield University, Sheffield Robotics, and I'm in the Department of Psychology right now, but that's not all where I've started. My background is not all in robotics. I started out doing culture studies and English literature as my main research areas, degrees from way back when. And then I wound up teaching a lot of psychoanalytic theory and psychoanalytic culture, literary theory. I came to robotics very much kind of from a different point of view. I'm not like a computer scientist or engineer. So I started working with Sheffield Robotics really to at first answer just one question. When the director there said, "Why are we afraid of robots?" We had a very productive conversation. And so I thought that's a really interesting question because obviously you can see within the population we're all very afraid of robots all the time, of course. But when I first went to Sheffield's labs, this is what I saw. And I think maybe some of you will recognize some of these robots. I think we've got them all here, don't you, as well? Bristol, we've got ICOM, and Now, and Caro down there in the corner, and we've got some kilobots down there, and nothing very scary, nothing very frightening. This is what robotics looks like in a research lab. So if you work in a research lab, it's now incumbent upon me to remind you that not everybody in the world, when they think of robots, thinks of those things. For the rest of us, we tend to think of, this isn't transferring over. We tend to think of this kind of stuff. This is a montage. If you want, feel free to go out and watch clips these are. I will show you now, and I will show you that's our robot
I want more life, Father.
I'll just come back, touch on most of these points. If you're listening to it right now, this is the remake box on that. They're robots, and this is also what a robot looks like in the popular imagination. The reason I do it is to talk to them. How original robots, and the kind of thing they represent and the consequences of that. Everyone has to want 5 panels of robots, and the insufficient methods we want to take over the world. That's Doctor Who, the Cybermen, and I end with that one, even though it's one of the earlier ones, because I love that line, the "you shall be like us," he says, which actually one of the main arguments I'm going to make, or I make consistently, is that that's already the problem, that we are like them, and that's actually where the source of fear comes from, and why we have this anxiety about robots in general. I'll just, if I can jump in for a couple other quick stories. I'm a parent, so I learned most things about the world through my children. So when I started researching the why we're afraid of robots, my son, I think he was about 10 at the time, 9 or 10, said, what are you researching? I said, I'm looking at why we're afraid of robots. And he looked at me in complete and utter disbelief and said, of course we're afraid of robots now. They got laser eyes and they guns and they're going to kill us all. What are you talking about? So he was very, couldn't believe I was bothering with that. And then my daughter, when she was about 4 or 5, just kind of picked up on this and walked into the room one day and made a bit of a regular thing. So my slides are jumping ahead automatically. I'm just going to keep them restrained. Anyway, she comes into the room with arms out like this, saying, "I am a robot," like that. I just kept saying it over and over again in a really kind of disturbing, incessant way, and I couldn't get her to break out of it. So these are the ideas that people have about robots. That if you haven't seen the ones in the labs, this is kind of what we're confronted. And you might say, well, that's just silly science fiction. There's much more responsible views in the public imagination what a robot looks like. So if I can just share with you some headlines from responsible-ish media sources. I don't know how you feel about the Daily Mail, not my favorite. But there's really interesting things here, like robots be murderers out of kindness, Terminator comes close to reality, shape-shifting liquid motor powers itself by eating metal. What's particularly good? The New Scientist, who should really know better, Terminator-style liquid metal connects severed nerves. Fantastic invention, fantastic bit of technology, but it's painted in terms of the Terminator. The Telegraph article we talked right there. Robot vacuum cleaner attacks South Korea housewife's hair. You see the way we anthropomorphize. So it was a mistake, it was an accident. But we say, oh, the robot attacked her. And we attribute this kind of evil motives to these machines. Another one that is at the bottom one there, the rise of the Cyberman, Terminator-style bionic ear. They can give people Superman hearing. What a great thing they developed. Isn't that wonderful? We can give people proper hearing, and we're going to paint it in terms of Cyberman and Terminator in the same headline. So here's a great thing, beware. And I think this is one of the things that some of the roboticists at Sheffield Robotics wanted me to address, was the problem that we do these great things and there's these wonderful things being done in labs. And if you look at the example of what happened with genetically modified foods, whether you're for or against them, part of what happened was there was some really terrific science there that got absolutely buried under a wave of public discontent and paranoia. So part of what I guess I was brought on was also PR jobs, which I think I should have done public relations officer instead. But answering the question, why are we afraid of robots? Something I just kind of recently began to research and look into as well, looking at more of the history of robots, is, there you go, my slides decided I need to keep going. In the popular media, in some respects, we invent robots in our imagination before we invent robots in the lab. Somebody says to me when I, sorry, I'm just going to try to not let jump ahead. Somebody says to me, I have him now with me, I'm doing a demonstration, say, oh look, you brought him to life. And I say, well, not really. You brought him to life in your imagination. When you attribute life to him, and you say, I'm going to take those two little cameras and that little spot that's a mouth, and you say, wow, he looks alive, and he's looking at me. We're making these robots come alive in our imaginations. The imagination is a very powerful tool in the invention of robots. So here's a little example from the history of robots. In 1927, I'm struggling with the slides today. Mr. Wensley from Westinghouse Robotics invented something called the Televox, which did nothing more really than, it was like an automatic phone answering service. It didn't answer phones like an answering machine, but it would help direct calls to the right place. It really didn't do very much at all, very useful. But when the reporters went to look at it and interview him about it, they noticed that, oh look, you created a man. I said, what do you mean I created a man? We've got a head and a body. And he was thinking, well, that's silly. So the way it's reported, thank you, slide, the way it was reported in the media became machines that think, electrical men, answer phones, do household chores, operate machinery, and solve mathematical problems, none of which Televox could do. But because it looked like a man, the media started reporting it that way. And then, I don't know if you see this slide down here at the bottom, the New York Times has an editorial cartoon with Ultravox, and they stick arms and legs on it. And then suddenly that becomes the template of a robot. Robots didn't really exist, didn't really look like that, but then if you think to the 1930s, 40s, 50s, that's what we think robots look like. That square head, square body, arms and legs. So really, it was invented by the media. And then the problem was that the media invented this concept of robots. That's what people come to expect. So Westinghouse had to put arms and legs on the machine because that's what people expected. So there's the invention of robots, and very little to do with what's actually happening in labs, and much more to do with what's happening. Sorry, slide me to stop skipping. Much more to do with what's happening in the public imagination and how we interpret these things. So, as I said, I come from a background of psychoanalytic culture studies, so I have some psychoanalytic explanations for it. I don't want to discount anything else. There's lots and lots of possible explanations for why we're afraid of robots. Here's some. There's fear of death or annihilation, the fear of disintegration, being subsumed in a collective identity. That's the Borg from Star Trek. The fear of the dead mother, which is kind of psychoanalytic shorthand for saying that you live in an environment that's not responsive to you. And of course, there's the absolute classic fear of Oedipus, or the Oedipal complex, which is fear of the father, or also fear of the progeny will come and attack the father, which is something we'll get into a little bit later. So, going back to my daughter's impersonation or impression of what robots were, I wasn't sure if she was doing an impersonation of Frankenstein or zombies. But I think both is really perfect, because what it shows us is that robots, as we construct them as monsters, are actually just kind of in a lineage of monsters that have gone back for really centuries. And they're really no different than Frankenstein or zombies, or a whole host of other monsters. Like, the Jekyll and Hyde, the way we've constructed Nazism as a bogeyman from the past, or HAL, artificial intelligence. There's Blade Runner, Nazi zombies, which I think is a perfect kind of but you got all the other robots and monsters. They can all be seen as a lineage. So we've got a kind of history. We have descendants going right back to Frankenstein. There's earlier versions, but I think Frankenstein is important. So I want to just get and look at that for a minute. Look at this romantic imagination of where something like Frankenstein comes from. It comes out of Romanticism. So the late 18th, early 19th century ideas that were changing about what the human individual is and imagination. The Romantics really lionized the Prometheus, if you remember from Greek myth. He was the hero that stole fire from the gods and gave it to human beings. And the Promethean hero is all the best qualities of the new great man, the Superman, the great artist, who's uncowed by the limits of authority and drags a pitchfork wielding mobs into modernism. So you see Goethe's stories, Byron, Shelley all wrote stories about the Promethean hero, or about an ode to Prometheus. But the one you're probably most familiar with is a slightly different take on Prometheus' story. And that would be Mary Shelley's novel, Frankenstein, because it's even subtitled Modern Prometheus. And why Frankenstein's interesting, it gives us a much more ambivalent relationship and concept of what was the Promethean hero. So it doesn't demonize the Promethean hero, but also shows that there's danger in this ambitious Superman. That there's our invention, our desire to create, can be seen as a hubris. And in that story, as I'm going to explain a little bit more, that there's a sense that not only we create monsters that destroy us, but there's a suggestion in Frankenstein, because Frankenstein is the scientist, that we're becoming the monster that actually we fear. You can argue who's the monster in Frankenstein. This is really funny, because my slides keep pushing me forward, like it's going, come on, move it. Right, so okay, Frankenstein. Let's look at Frankenstein. What does Frankenstein teach us? Human endeavor, science and technology, whatever its noble intentions, creates a monster. Okay, that's the problem. So if we go too far, we're going to create monsters. Hubris makes us think that we can control that monster. Okay, but inevitably it goes all horribly wrong. The unnatural monster gains autonomy, cannot be submitted to human will, and our creation comes back to haunt and destroy us. You see this in the first mention of the word robots, R-U-R. You see it in Metropolis, the first film with a robot in it. And you see it in the most recent films with robots in Chappie and Ex Machina. And it's present in all these things. And we haven't really moved beyond that in a lot of ways. Here's an example from Blade Runner again of the Frankenstein.
You remember the spider that lived in a bush outside your window? Orange body, green legs. Watched her build a web all summer. Then one day there's a big egg in it. The egg hatched.
The egg hatched,
Yeah.
and 100 baby spiders came out. And they ate her.
That's just to demonstrate this kind of consistency of what the Frankenstein myth, that Oedipal narrative of the progeny destroying its creator all the time. It comes back again and again. There's my slides hopefully moving me along. But Frankenstein isn't the monster. Frankenstein is a scientist. And that's an important distinction to make. So what does that tell us? What does that suggest to us? It suggests that the monster isn't really what we create, but that we ourselves are the monster. And this is the important point. Isaac Asimov, for example, most of you will be familiar with him because he did the great science fiction writing, addressed this Frankenstein complex. And he was very, very disappointed with the way that robots and mad scientists have been portrayed in art through the years. Frankenstein is likened to Faust, who had these mad creators, the scientists, and you can kind of see in the background there, the mad scientists with test tubes and electricity, creating all these horrible inventions. The scientist is the blasphemer, And Asimov countered this by just having very everyday workers, engineers. Susan Calvin isn't a blasphemer against God, not interested in personal gain and narcissistic kind of Frankenstein guy. They're just somebody doing a job. And that's what Asimov gives us. And partly that's why Asimov's stories are maybe as exciting as something like Zack Miner or some of these stories are actually blasting robots all the time. But this important distinction, that it's not the monster it's not the creation that's the monster we need to be afraid of, but it's the scientist is the person we need to be afraid of. It's the creator. It's what we are becoming, not necessarily what we're creating. So here's what does Dr. Frankenstein suggest? What does this lesson teach us, or what does it suggest about what we're afraid of in terms of robots? So partly we're afraid of losing the qualities that define us as human. In this quest for science, as we become more and more scientific, as we become more and more enamored of rationalism, we become more and more, somehow less and less human, more and more dedicated to science and cold rationality. And this cold rationality is actually what makes us like robots. We're becoming those robots because we become less interested in emotions and empathy. We become empty shells, these cold mechanical, kind of mechanical men, unfeeling rationalism. And that's what we as human beings are becoming. There's a sense that we're losing something of our humanity. It's not just the robots that are soulless and mechanical, but we become soulless and mechanical. And then so robots aren't the other. They're not the monster that's coming to attack us. The robots are actually projections of ourselves. And that's the key. That goes back to that line I wanted to emphasize from the Cybermen, that you shall be like us. Stop with the jumping. It's like I've got a reveal I want to read you. I say, wait for it, and you just jump again. Anyway, so that's the key point that I want to make, is that the robots aren't some other thing. They're not something different to us, not some external, like an alien that's coming from without to attack us. The robot is a reflection of us. We mirror each other. Here's an example of how that works, I mean, not just visually, but robots are kind of they become the projection of our rational selves. As we become more and more scientific, if you think about the Terminator, for example, its ruthlessness, the way it keeps relentlessly pursuing. We can't escape it. Because like the Freudian repressed, it is us. We can't escape ourselves. It keeps coming back to haunt us. It always finds out because we can't escape it, because we carry that around with us all the time. Again, Du Ender's Dream of Electric Sheep, the book that Blade Runner is based on, Descartes says, the android is the solitary predator. The android is the cold, calculating killer. Completely seemingly missing the point that he himself is a cold, calculating killer. I'm not going to say anything else because I would spoil territory. You won't see that. I won't be responsible for that. This is evident right from the very beginning, like I've said, with robots. This is a scene from RUR, Russell Universal Robots, the play that was the base where the term robot first came from. There's a poster for it. So in the term robot, which is a Czech word meaning slave, basically, kind of forced labor, there's always the implication that the robot is something less than human, that lacks emotion, the robot lacks empathy, governed only by reason. And there's this sense that in the robot, that there's something, in there being something less than human, that when we ourselves dedicate ourselves to science or rationality, we're becoming something rather less than human ourselves. I'm going to go a bit faster. This is actually Capek's brother, the Capek who wrote RUR. His brother, Cubist painter, did this. And there's a lot of attention at the time, late 19th century, early 20th century, a lot of fear about what's happening to human beings. Freud talked about dissociative disorders, people like Marx talking about how we're alienated from our labor. You can see this in the art, in the idea of man or a human being on an assembly line, that somehow something fundamental is being lost in our humanity as we become these mechanized versions of ourselves. So the robot is actually just an expression of that. What makes a robot doubly frightening is that on the one hand, it is an expression that we're afraid of the robot because it is our rational, dehumanized self. And that's one reason we're afraid of robots. We're also so afraid of robots because we project all the normal human qualities onto a robot as well. So robots are also representative of our animalistic impulses, those violent passions and desires there. So, a robot wants to commit genocide. That comes from us. That's nothing rational about that. So the robot's particularly scary, particularly effective as a monster in terms of kind of carrying and being contained of social anxiety, because it can contain both. It can be the rational, dehumanized cells that we fear will be coming, and the violent, repressed, animalistic cells that we think we once were. So I'm going to conclude there because I have to now. That's good. Yeah, so I'm going to do that. I just want to say, though, that this is a really important point to make, that I'm not a technophobe in any way, shape, or form. I'm a really brave person coming in and be a technophobe and say, give it all up, people, because we're dehumanizing ourselves. I don't believe that there's an essential human nature that we need to maintain, we need to stay true to. It's clear that there's a social anxiety about the kind of people that we think we are, and the kind of people that we perhaps are becoming. And I think that these are constructive notions. The same way we construct robots and bring them to life in our imagination, we construct human beings in our imagination. We have a sense of who we are, who we think we should be. So I'm not at all saying we should eschew technology, but and this is a quote from Asimov, it says, Faust must indeed face Mephistopheles, but Faust does not have to be defeated. Just saying that we have to wrestle with these demons. We don't have to lose to them. And if you look at, there's already, many people can already point out and say, well, we're not just afraid of robots. We have many more ambivalent relations with robots. This is something that we're moving towards. I think there's lots of evidence that this is the direction things are going. So technology isn't just bad. RoboCop, yay, coming to save the day. By the second Terminator, already the second Terminator movie, Arnie's not the bad guy anymore. He's the good guy, saving us from other technology. And I got Daniel Wilson, Robotics, and that'll be a film, if you want to read that before it becomes a film very soon. And all these kind of suggest that, yes, the problem might be technology, the monster is technology, this dehumanized conception of ourselves as technology is the monster, but also the answer, the solution might as well lie in technology, and a kind of new conception of what it means to be human. Thank you.
What happened to the good robots? So, those are really liked in the cartoons of the 80s, where there's a man in control inside of the brain of the robot that is using the full potential of the machine to defend human beings from bad monsters coming from the outer space.
Yeah, or Pacific Rim
Yes.
was a good one, and I loved Big Hero 6. That was my favorite because it completely abandoned the Frankenstein trope. And the immediate research I was sent on was, why are we afraid of robots? How do we counteract these bad headlines? And why is this a problem? So the good robots are something I'm coming to later. I could have touched on it a little bit more, I think, in this. Just time constraints said no, I'm not allowed. But I'm sorry, not to say that. I think it's really interesting how technology. The flip side, though, is that if we, and this is kind of the Freudian way of looking at things, but if you demonize technology and that becomes the big bad, too often then the response is to say, oh no, but technology is not demonize it, but idealize it, and then it becomes our savior. And I don't think either relationship is particularly healthy. I think the problem is when you have something that's all bad, the flip side is it's all good. I think we have to be careful. We don't expect technology to save us from ourselves all the time. So if we look at Terminator's salvation, yay, human race's salvation is the robot. Or we expect robots to kind of save us from ourselves. I think something like Big Hero 6. There's a personal conflict. There's a story about not a robot, but a boy just getting over grief and loss. And the robots save us from that. So I think there's a danger that we shouldn't demonize robots, but likewise we shouldn't idealize them and expect them to save us from ourselves. We should really just kind of use them as kind of as they're supposed to be, as tools in a much more ambivalent relationship, and just say, okay, well, let's approach this and not see them as something that defines human beings either way necessarily.